On May 30, 2024, a naked man stood on the edge of the roof of the 65-story Latte Hotel in Hanoi, Vietnam. He was frantic, disorientated, and violently swinging at anyone trying to help him. Down in room 6012, his girlfriend lay dead on the bed. When investigators ran the suspect's name, the results shocked them. The man on the roof wasn't just a random tourist. He was Lee Chan-ju, once hailed as one of South Korea's most promising professional esports stars. Somewhere in the brief 10 minutes before checking into that room and running onto the roof, his complete psychological collapse turned fatal. To understand Lee Chan-ju, you have to understand the hyper-competitive landscape that created him. For the younger generation, video games aren't just a hobby anymore. They are a legitimate ladder to wealth, status, and fame. Nowhere is that more true than in South Korea, and no game holds more power than League of Legends. The country didn't just adopt esports, it institutionalized it. Government support, media infrastructure, a complete professional pipeline from youth academies to major league franchises. The League of Legends champions Korea, also known as the LCK, is arguably the strongest and one of the most watched esports leagues in the world. Matches are broadcast on national television, players are treated like celebrities, the world champions become national figures. The result is a level of pressure and visibility that Western audiences rarely associate with gaming. Making it in the LCK means something, but failing to make it means something as well. Lee Chan-ju was born in Seoul on June 12, 2000. He started playing League of Legends around age 13, cycling through a few online handles before settling on Yaharong, a name taken from a greeting used by the female lead in a Japanese novel. On the highly competitive South Korean server with 3 million players, he was ranked near the top. He was by all definitions a prodigy. The only thing holding him back from going pro was the age 17 requirement of Korean televised competition. In 2016, the 16-year-old Lee dropped out of high school to pursue his dream full-time. The gamble paid off. The moment he hit the age cutoff the next year, he signed with generic Green Wings, securing a coveted starting position for the LCK. For a high school dropout from Seoul, he had made it to the top of his sport. For a few years, he was competing against the best in the world, but the pressure caught up with him. After struggling to maintain his footing in Korea, he decided to try his luck abroad, transferring to a Japanese team, Destination Focus Me, for the 2022 season.
안녕하세요. DFM 리드 야하롱 이찬주입니다.
That same year, at 22 years old, he qualified for the World Championships, the biggest stage in League of Legends, but he fell short. His team was eliminated early, and back in the gaming house, his form plummeted. His contract expired, and no other team picked him up. At just 22 years old, Yaharong abruptly retired. He went from making 6 figures a year under the stadium lights to being an unemployed youth cast aside by the industry with no real-world experience. There is a specific kind of collapse that happens when elite athletes retire young, when an identity built around being exceptional at something suddenly has nowhere to go. The structure disappears, the daily purpose disappears, the world that he grew up in evaporates overnight. For Lee Chan-ju, that collapse came early and it came fast, and what followed was not a graceful transition. He was rapidly losing his grip on reality, drifting further into isolation. And that's when Park Hyun-ah came into his life. To Lee, she must have felt like an anchor in the storm. Born in 1991, 9 years older than him, Park had studied abroad in Australia. After returning home, she built a successful, stable life working at a company in Busan. Everyone who knew her described the same person: mature, grounded, and deeply caring. The kind of woman who made the people around her feel safer just by being present. When they met at a friend's house in 2023, Lee started pursuing her passionately. For a guy who had just lost everything that once defined him, Hyun-ah represented everything he lacked: maturity, emotional safety, and stability. Her friends knew about him and his previous life as the former esports player Yaharong. By the end of the year, it was clear to her close friend circle that they were together. When Park finally mentioned the relationship to her parents in April 2024, they weren't worried. None of her friends were worried. They all knew that she was a mature woman with good judgment and a track record of making careful decisions. What none of them knew, and what she may not have known herself, was that Lee Chan-ju was already in the midst of a full-blown psychiatric crisis. By the time she stepped in to try and stabilize this broken former star, he wasn't just struggling, he was actively resisting treatment. Unbeknownst to her, months earlier, that crisis had already gone public. He called a nail salon in Gangnam and showed up for a manicure, but almost immediately, the interaction turned bizarre. Over the next 40 minutes, he kept telling the owner how wonderful the salon smelled. again and again, making her feel increasingly uncomfortable. When the appointment finally ended, things went completely off the rails. He refused to pay his bill and he refused to leave. Instead, he wandered around the shop muttering to himself, shifting from seat to seat, while the owner and the only other customer in the store watched in confusion. Then, without warning, he climbed onto the salon's treatment bed, stripped completely naked, and just laid there with a vacant expression, looking almost content. The owner begged him to put his clothes back on, but he didn't move. The police eventually showed up and took him away, but a standard drug test came back completely clean. This wasn't drugs. What investigators and his family finally had to confront was that Lee Chun-ju was in the middle of a catastrophic manic episode. He was soon formally diagnosed with Bipolar I disorder. This is the most severe classification of the condition. During acute episodes, it could trigger full psychosis, deep delusions, and a complete loss of behavioral inhibition. Looking back, the signs were already there for months. Fans had already noticed the sudden drastic weight loss after retirement, the dazed, empty look in his eyes during live streams, the incoherent rambling, all of it pointing to a bigger problem that no one had named yet. After the diagnosis, he was put on a strict outpatient routine involving monthly injections and heavy medication, but he fought it every step of the way. His father later admitted that their relationship completely fell apart over the issues of medication. Later, when his friends asked him why he'd done what he did at the salon, his answer was chillingly simple. He couldn't contain his intimate urges. He'd gotten overwhelmed with excitement. It was precisely during this chaotic period that he met Park Hyun-ah and began pursuing her. We don't know if Park knew the full extent of the diagnosis, but we do know what she told her closest friends. During their months together, she complained multiple times that he would verbally abuse her out of nowhere, exhibiting extreme, volatile behaviors that made her seriously consider packing her bags and ending the relationship. But each time she drew the line, she ended up stepping back over it. She told her friends that he just seemed so helpless. She had a soft spot and felt sorry for him, so out of pure empathy, she stayed. On May 27, 2024, Park's father called her for a routine chat. She sounded exhausted, but he didn't think much of it. What he didn't know was that next door, Lee Chun-ju had been spiraling for days. Their texts revealed the nightmare she was dealing with. At one point, a frustrated Hyun-ah wrote, "I don't understand what you're saying anymore." By the next night, May 28, his grip on reality fractured entirely. At 9:58 p.m., Lee Chun-ju ran into the Seoul police station. Shirtless and barefoot, he was frantic, telling police officers someone he called the convenience store employee wouldn't stop staring at him, and he had fled to the station out of pure terror. He was completely incoherent. Seeing his state, the police called his father to come drag him home. The father brought him back to the house, but incredibly, despite the massive warning signs, he still failed to get his son to take the medication. The failure turned fatal just hours later. At 3 a.m. the next day, Lee Chun-ju quietly walked out of the house wearing nothing but shorts and a t-shirt. He headed straight to the Incheon airport and boarded the very first flight to Hanoi, Vietnam. He was operating under a massive, terrifying delusion. He had previously told his father that a global earthquake was destroying the world, and that if he boarded a plane to manually correct the Earth's axis of rotation, the earthquakes would stop. His father had brushed it off as his usual nonsense, never imagining his son would actually translate that mental chaos into a physical international plane ticket. But there might have been a far darker motivation driving this trip. Right before boarding, Lee had texted a friend to borrow some cash, explicitly stating that the real reason he was going to Vietnam was to vent his intimate urges. The moment he landed in Vietnam, his mania completely boiled over. He walked into a hotel to check in, but because he couldn't communicate clearly with the front desk, he flew into a rage and violently smashed his own phone. He stormed out of the city. Just hours later, local citizens witnessed a deeply unsettling sight. Lee Chun-ju was standing completely naked and dead still on the shore of the lake, staring blankly out into the water. Passerby quickly called the police, and authorities dragged him away into a local station. And it was there, sitting at a Vietnamese holding cell, that he finally saw a frantic message from Park asking where he was. He typed back a brief, cold reply, giving her father's phone number and telling her to call him. When the South Korean embassy finally got a hold of his father, they confirmed that his son was locked up in Vietnam and someone needed to come get him. In later interviews with the media, the father claimed he had discouraged Park from going, that he had warned her it was far too dangerous, but the text messages between them tell a completely different, chilling story. On May 29, the father texted Park, "You have to go over first thing and bring him back. I have urgent business tomorrow. The earliest I can make it is the day after tomorrow." Park Hyun-ah, clearly hesitant, replied, "What if I go tomorrow and he refuses to see me?" The father's response was cold. "There's no choice. Don't trigger him. Keep in touch. You cannot mention the matter of taking medicine to him." And then he sent her this instruction. "After you arrive, buy a bottle of cola and mix the medicine into it. It's better if you put 2 doses inside. Think about this for a second. This man knew his son better than anyone. He knew his son became so violently panicked over his medication that the subject couldn't even be brought up. He knew his son had a history of uncontrollable, dangerous intimate impulses during his episodes. He knew his son had just fled the country in a severe delusional state, and yet his solution was to send a lone woman into a closed hotel room in a foreign country to secretly drug the manic person. And because she cared so deeply, Park didn't hesitate. She threw her own life on pause, canceling a crucial job interview she had lined up for that week. She didn't want to panic her family, so she lied to her parents, telling them she had to fly to Vietnam for an urgent project. Lee's father quietly wired her the money for the flight and the booking. At 8 a.m. on May 30, Park Hyun-ah boarded a flight to Hanoi. By noon, she walked into the local police station with help from the embassy. She signed the paperwork acting as his guarantor and successfully secured his release. Her plan was to turn right around and fly them both back to South Korea the next day, but Lee Chan-ju resisted, claiming he was exhausted and just wanted to rest for a single night first. Park eventually agreed. At 12:54 p.m., hotel surveillance captured the two of them walking into the luxury latte hotel lobby. Their fingers were tightly interlaced, looking like any ordinary couple, but if you look closely, there is a glaring warning sign. Lee Chan-ju is completely barefoot walking across the marble floor while casually holding his shoes in his hand. At 1:09 p.m., they stepped into the elevator, rode up to the 60th floor, and walked into room 6012. That was the last footage ever captured of Park Hyun-ah alive. Exactly 10 minutes later, the door flew open, and Lee Chan-ju ran out alone, sprinting for the roof. The autopsy report painted a horrifying picture of what happened behind that closed door. Park Hyun-ah died of suffocation, her face violently pressed into the hotel pillow. Her forehead and face were covered in deep, bleeding wounds from a frantic beating, with further blunt force trauma marking her abdomen and pelvis. A jagged 17cm scratch tore across her neck, the undeniable mark of her desperate resistance as he strangled her. When Lee Chan-ju was first detained, he admitted to the killing, coldly telling police he snapped because she refused to have intercourse with him. Hours later, he changed his story. He spun a malicious, completely unverified lie that he had discovered she used to be an adult worker and that he killed her in a rage after feeling betrayed. Her family and friends would later completely deny it. There is also zero evidence to back this up. Then came the final complication. His drug test came back positive. Whether he used before boarding in Seoul or scored something locally in Hanoi will determine the rest of his life. Vietnam enforces some of the harshest drug laws on the planet. If investigators could prove he crossed the border with controlled substances, he faces dual charges of trafficking and murder, and the death sentence becomes a real possibility. That's exactly why his father has spent months doing damage control with the media, pushing the story that this was purely a mental health crisis and working nonstop to bury the drug test. In Vietnam, erasing that one detail may be the only thing standing between his son and a lethal injection. Lee Chan-ju remains in the Vietnamese holding facility as of the time of this recording, heavily medicated, awaiting the results of a painfully slow psychiatric evaluation. No formal charges had been finalized. Meanwhile, Park Hyun-ah's family had been left with nothing, no answers, not a single word of apology from Lee Chan-ju or his father. She was warm to her friends, devoted to her family, and deeply in love with the life she had built for herself. She was only 33, with everything still ahead of her. But the truth is, Lee Chan-ju's collapse didn't happen in a vacuum. It didn't happen without warning. A league that discarded him the moment he stopped winning. A father who knew exactly how dangerous his son had become and sent a woman into a locked hotel room with him anyway rather than go himself. A system in 2 countries now arguing over who's responsible for what happens next. Every single person who saw the warning signs had made the same choice, let someone else deal with it. Park Hyun-ah was the only person who never made that choice, and it cost her everything. I'm Richard, and this was Dark Silk. If this story hit you, leave a comment below. I read every single one. Don't forget to like and subscribe if you want to keep supporting me and following these hidden regional cases from the East. Stay safe out there, and I'll see you guys next week.